right now, as you watch this video, something extraordinary is happening in global politics, and the mainstream media is completely ignoring it. Donald Trump has quietly done something no American president has done in decades. He has stopped being the enforcer. Let me explain what that means. Because once you understand it, you'll never look at oil prices, sanctions, wars, or banking the same way again. For the last several decades, there has been a hidden financial empire operating behind the scenes of global politics. It doesn't answer to voters. It doesn't appear on ballots. Most people have never heard its name. It's called the City of London. And before you roll your eyes and say, "I've heard this conspiracy theory before," stay with me because we're going to walk through the documented, verifiable economic mechanisms through which this empire operates. And we're going to show you exactly how Trump is dismantling it piece by piece in real time. This video is going to cover 5 major things. 1. Why Trump allowed Russia to sell sanctioned oil, and why the timing of the Alaska summit was not a coincidence. 2. What the City of London actually is and how it controls prices, wars, and governments. 3. How the IMF operates as a sophisticated loan shark operation designed to keep developing nations permanently in debt. 4. Why China and Russia have spent the last 20 years quietly building a parallel financial system outside Western control. And 5. What Trump's meetings with both Putin and Xi are really about, and what comes next. If this is the first time you're hearing some of this, that's okay. That's actually the point. Let's get into it. Let's start with the oil. In early 2025, something strange happened. Right before the United States launched military operations against Iran, Russia began storing massive quantities of oil, not in its onshore storage facilities, but on tankers sitting offshore at sea. Now, here's why that's strange. Russia is not a country that lacks storage space. They have enormous onshore oil infrastructure. So why were they suddenly storing oil on floating tankers in the middle of the ocean? The answer became clear almost immediately. When the United States began its military action against Iran, Trump made a very deliberate announcement. Russia could now sell that oil. The oil that had been sitting on those tankers, sanctioned oil, oil that couldn't legally be sold under the existing international sanctions regime, was suddenly cleared for market. Think about what this means strategically. The oil was pre-positioned. The decision to allow its sale was pre-planned. And the timing, right as Iran was being struck, was not an accident. This tells us something very important. The meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska wasn't just a diplomatic photo op. Something substantive was agreed to. Something that involved the future of Russia's economy, the fate of Iran's oil leverage, and a fundamental restructuring of how global energy is priced and controlled. Now, why would Trump do this? Why would an American president, whose voters expect him to be tough on Russia, essentially give Russia a massive economic lifeline? The answer is that Trump is not operating within the old framework. He's not playing by the rules of the empire that his predecessors enforced. To understand what I mean, we need to talk about the City of London. Section 2, what is the City of London? 7, Stage 13. On screen, aerial footage of London's financial district. When most people hear City of London, they picture Big Ben, the Queen's Guard, red phone boxes. But the City of London, capital C, capital L, is something entirely different. It is a 1 square mile jurisdiction within London that operates under its own laws, its own police force, and its own ancient corporate governance structure that predates the British Parliament. It is, in effect, a sovereign financial city-state operating inside the United Kingdom. Mid-video media reference number 2, insert graphic or document screenshot here, Wikipedia overview, screenshot, https://hn.wikipedia.org, Wiki City of London Corporation academic paper on City of London sovereignty. Search Google Scholar, City of London Corporation sovereignty financial, free documentary clip, search YouTube. City of London explained documentary, use clips under fair use commentary. From this 1 square mile radiates an extraordinary network of financial institutions, law firms, insurance markets, commodity exchanges, and intelligence-linked foundations that extend influence across every continent on Earth. The structure looks something like this. At the very base of the pyramid, like gold is at the base of all financial assets, sits the City of London. Above it, you have layers of agencies, banks, and international institutions that act as its proxies. One of those proxies is the European Union. Another is the IMF and the World Bank. Another is SWIFT, the International Bank Transfer System. And at the very top of the visible layer, the enforcement arm, has historically been the United States military and diplomatic apparatus. Do you understand what that means? For decades, the United States has been the muscle for a financial empire based in London. American soldiers, American diplomats, American sanctions, all deployed to enforce the economic interests of institutions that answer not to Washington, but to the City of London. Now, sanctions are one of the most powerful tools in this system. When the empire wants to punish a country that refuses to play by its rules, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, it uses the United States to impose sanctions, and it uses the European Union to pile on additional pressure. The EU has now imposed over 20 separate sanctions packages against Russia since 2022, 20 packages. And what has been the result? Russia is not on its knees. Russia's economy has not collapsed. The ruble has recovered. Russian oil is still flowing, just through different routes. Russia has developed its own payment systems, its own bank card infrastructure, and has strengthened its gold reserves to among the largest in the world. The sanctions, in a very real sense, hurt Europe more than they hurt Russia. Mid-video media reference Fire 3. Insert chart here. European energy price increases chart. https aiki.europa.eu Eurostat Statistics Explained Search. Europe energy prices 2022, 2023, 2024 on Eurostat. IMF World Economic Outlook Russia GDP https://www.imf.org and publications WEO. And here's the beautiful irony: Europe was buying Russian oil, it was buying Russian fertilizer, it was buying Russian gas. When it sanctioned all of this, it didn't stop buying. It just started buying it at higher prices, routed through third countries like India with added markups. Russia sold to India, India repackaged it, India sold to Europe, Europe paid more, so Europe punished itself to punish Russia. Russia made the same money. India made extra money. And the only people who suffered were ordinary European citizens paying higher energy bills and higher food prices. Trump sees this, and he's decided America is no longer going to be the enforcer of a system that harms its own allies and enriches the middlemen. Section 3, the IMF, Loan Sharks in Suits, 13-1-19-1. On screen, IMF headquarters, Washington, D.C. Now let's talk about the International Monetary Fund. The official story is that the IMF exists to help countries in economic distress. When a nation is struggling, the IMF arrives with a loan, stabilizes the currency, and helps the country get back on its feet. That is the official story. Here is what actually happens. When the IMF arrives in a country, it comes with what's called a structural adjustment program. In exchange for the loan, the country must implement a series of economic reforms. These reforms almost always include the same elements: cut government spending on healthcare, education, and public services. Privatize state-owned industries, open markets to foreign investment and imports, reduce tariffs and trade protections, maintain high interest rates to attract foreign capital. Mid-video media reference NAR 4, insert documentary reference, IMF structural adjustment, official IMF page, https www.imf.org, external NPXR facts SAF HTM. World Bank criticism academic paper. Search Google Scholar. IMF structural adjustment program criticism Africa. Documentary Life and Debt Jamaica IMF, available on YouTube. https www.youtube.com. Results. Search query Life plus and Debt plus documentary plus IMF plus Jamaica. What do these reforms actually do in practice? They prevent governments from directing investment toward productive, wealth-generating industries. They force governments to prioritize debt repayment over development. They open domestic markets to cheap foreign imports that destroy local manufacturing. They create the conditions for foreign corporations to buy up national assets at discount prices. In short, the IMF Structural Adjustment Program is engineered to keep countries permanently dependent and permanently indebted. This is the exact opposite of what economists like Alexander Hamilton called the American system of political economy, where a government directs investment toward productive industries, protects infant manufacturing with tariffs, and builds national wealth through sovereign development. Countries that have tried to follow the American development model and paid off their IMF loans have frequently found their leaders overthrown, sanctioned, or worse. Putin understood this when he came to power in Russia. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Western corporations, backed by City of London capital, moved into Russia like vultures. They worked with corrupt officials to buy up Russian industry, energy, and resources at pennies on the dollar. The oligarchs were created, the wealth was extracted, and Russia was offered an IMF loan to stabilize its economy. Putin came in, looked at the terms, looked at what had happened to the country, and said no. He kicked out the NGOs. He removed the Western-linked financial institutions. He defaulted on arrangements that were destroying Russian sovereignty, and he began rebuilding Russia's economy along sovereign protectionist lines. The City of London has never forgiven him for that. Every sanction, every proxy war, every propaganda campaign against Russia for the past 25 years traces directly back to that decision. Putin refusing to let Russia be asset stripped by the empire. Section 4, China's Parallel System, 1925E. On screen, Beijing skyline, swift alternative diagram. China watched what happened to Russia very carefully, and China made a decision. We will not let this happen to us. Starting in the 1990s and accelerating through the 2000s, China began building the architecture of a parallel financial system. Not overnight, not loudly, but systematically and strategically. They developed their own bank card system to replace Visa and MasterCard. They built their own interbank payment system, CIPS, as an alternative to SWIFT. They accumulated gold at a scale that is difficult to fully measure because China does not export gold and does not fully disclose its reserves. They established the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank as an alternative to the World Bank, and they built the Belt and Road Initiative to create trade and infrastructure dependencies across Asia, Africa, and Latin America that bypass Western financial networks entirely. Mid-video media reference number 5. Insert here. CIPS payment system overview. https www.cips.com.cn AIIB official site. https www.aiib.org BRI tracker map free from AData. https www.adata.org Belt and Road Initiative Bloomberg article on China gold reserves. https www.bloomberg.com news articles. Search China gold reserves hidden. Russia did the same simultaneously. After being cut off from SWIFT in 2022, Obama had used SWIFT as a weapon against Russia and Europe followed. Russia accelerated the development of its own interbank system, SPFS, and its own international payment cards. The result is that today there is an emerging parallel financial architecture that operates entirely outside Western control. It involves Russia, China, India, Iran, and an increasing number of nations across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. This is what the establishment media calls a threat to the rules-based international order. But ask yourself, whose rules? Based on whose order? When the rules say that India must buy more expensive energy to punish Russia, even though it hurts Indian consumers, that's not a rules-based order. That's an empire protecting its revenue streams. India figured this out. India bought Russian oil, processed it, and resold it at a markup to Europe. India benefited enormously from the sanctions regime, not by following it, but by exploiting the gap between the empire's demands and economic reality. Section 5, OPEC, oil pricing, and Trump's real strategy, 25 Zhao 31. On screen, oil pump jacks, OPEC logo, Brent versus WTI chart. Now let's talk about oil pricing, because this is where it gets really interesting. Most people don't realize that there are two main oil price benchmarks in the world. The first is West Texas Intermediate, WTI. This is the American benchmark. When you buy a futures contract for WTI crude, if you hold it to expiration, you actually receive physical barrels of oil delivered to Cushing, Oklahoma. It's a real commodity. The second benchmark is Brent crude. This one is operated through London, and here's the critical difference. When a Brent futures contract expires, in the vast majority of cases, no physical oil changes hands. You receive a cash settlement, you receive paper. Mid-video media reference in the Merger 6. Insert explainer graphic CME Group explanation of WTI futures, https www.cmegroup.com markets, energy, crude oil, light sweet crude. HTML ICE, Brent crude explained, https www.theice.com, products 221 Brent crude futures YouTube explainer. Search WTI versus Brent crude explained. Use as B-roll reference. So the City of London runs a paper oil market that sets the price of real oil that comes out of the ground in Texas, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and everywhere else. Think about that for a moment. You produce the oil. Someone in London prices it, and that price determines how much money you make. This is what OPEC was designed to maintain. OPEC is often portrayed as a cartel of oil-producing nations protecting their interests. And on the surface, that's partially true. But at a deeper level, OPEC has historically served to maintain the Brent pricing system, and thus to maintain London's control over global energy pricing. When Trump attacks Iran and simultaneously releases Russian oil into the market, he is doing something very strategic to that system. He is increasing global oil supply, which puts downward pressure on prices. He is weakening Iran's leverage within OPEC, and he is demonstrating to every other OPEC member that the United States will not guarantee your market position unless you play by different rules. The goal, ultimately, is to break the Brent pricing monopoly, to return oil pricing power to the actual producers, and to end the system where London takes a cut of every barrel of oil produced on the planet through a paper futures market. American energy companies already produce more oil than any OPEC member. If Trump can break the Brent pricing system, American oil moves at American prices, and the City of London loses one of its most powerful revenue extraction mechanisms. Section 6. The chess moves. Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and what comes next? 31, wind 38 sites. On screen, world map with highlighted countries. So what is Trump's actual strategic sequence? If you understand the overall goal, to dismantle the financial empire that has used American power for its own benefit, then his moves start to make perfect sense. Venezuela was the first move. Trump applied maximum economic pressure, removed Chinese influence from America's immediate neighborhood, and demonstrated that the Monroe Doctrine is back in effect. China went quiet. Russia went quiet. They let it happen. Iran was the second move. Iran is not just a nuclear issue. Iran is an OPEC lever. Iran is a City of London financial proxy that has been using the threat of nuclear weapons as a negotiating chip for decades. By striking Iran and simultaneously releasing Russian oil into the market, Trump did two things. He weakened Iran's leverage, and he rewarded Russia for cooperating. Mid-video media reference. 7. Insert news clips. Al Jazeera, Iran nuclear deal history, https www.aljazeera.com, tag Iran, nuclear deal, Reuters, Venezuela sanctions 2025, https www.reuters.com, world, Americas, AP News, Cuba protests 2024-2025, https apnews.com, hub, Cuba. Cuba will be the third move. Cuba is already showing signs of internal pressure, protests, economic deterioration, public frustration with the regime. When the Cuban government falls, and it is moving in that direction, it will not fall to a City of London-backed replacement. It will fall to a nationalist government aligned with the new American framework. And China? Trump's visit to Beijing, which we recorded while he was there, is the most complex diplomatic move of all. Trump is not going to Beijing to make a deal that benefits China at America's expense. He's going to Beijing to establish the rules of coexistence. The message is, you can have your economic sphere. You can develop your Belt and Road. You can manage your own region. But you will not have spies in American universities. You will not have military assets in the Western Hemisphere. And you will not threaten Taiwan with force. In exchange, America will not try to collapse your financial system. We will do trade on fair terms. We will not be the enforcement arm of an empire that wants both of us subjugated. Mid-video media reference number 8, insert clip, White House official readout of Trump-Xi meeting, https www.whitehouse.gov, briefings, statements, CNBC coverage of Trump-Beijing visit, https www.cnbc.com, world, free stock footage, Beijing, https www.pexels.com, search videos Beijing. This is, in the language of strategy, a grand realignment. Not a friendship between these nations. They remain rivals and competitors. But a recognition that the current system in which a financial empire in London uses American and European power to control global resources is bad for the United States, bad for Russia, bad for China, and catastrophic for the developing world. Section 7. What it means for you. 38 Hauser 42,000. On screen, gas station prices, grocery store. So what does this actually mean for your daily life? First, energy prices. If Trump successfully breaks the OPEC Brent pricing cartel and opens American energy production fully, gas prices in the United States should decline. Not overnight, these are long-term structural changes, but the trajectory should be downward. Second, inflation. A significant part of American inflation over the past several years has been driven by the weaponization of global supply chains. Supply chains that were built to serve the financial interests of the empire, not the productive interests of American workers and consumers. Restructuring those supply chains takes time, but it means more domestic production, less dependence on China, and eventually more stability in consumer prices. Third, the dollar. There is a lot of talk about de-dollarization, about Russia and China moving away from the dollar in their trade. This is real, but it doesn't have to mean the collapse of the dollar. It could mean the return of the dollar to what it was originally meant to be. A domestic currency backed by American productive capacity, not a global reserve currency used to extract value from every nation on earth for the benefit of the City of London. The Federal Reserve has long operated as a proxy of the global banking empire, not as a servant of the American people. A genuine reassertion of American sovereignty would include reforming the Federal Reserve. That hasn't happened yet, but it's on the table. Conclusion: 42 Wajah, 45 one on screen. Trump, Putin, Xi montage. Here's the bottom line. Hi. What you are watching in global politics right now is not chaos. It is not random. It is a deliberate, multi-front strategic campaign to dismantle a financial empire that has operated largely unchallenged for over a century. That empire used American military power as its enforcement arm. It used NATO as its security alliance. It used the IMF as its debt trap. It used SWIFT as its financial weapon, and it used sanctions as its economic siege engine. Trump has decided no more. Whether you agree with his methods or not, whether you like him or hate him, what he is doing at the geopolitical level is genuinely historic. The question is whether he can complete the move before the empire strikes back. And that is what we'll be watching. Outro. If you found this analysis valuable, please share this video with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to this channel for weekly breakdowns of the stories that mainstream media refuses to cover. And drop a comment below. I want to know, do you think Trump can actually pull this off, or will the empire find a way to push back? I'll see you in the next video.